There is a number your doctor almost certainly has not given you. Not your cholesterol, not your blood pressure, not your BMI. A different number, one that a major prospective study published in the Journal of the American Heart Association found predicted stroke, heart attack, and mortality in adults over 70, independently of every other risk factor on your standard lab report. And if you are over 60, the research now shows that adults carrying the highest levels of this specific type of fat have roughly double the stroke risk of those carrying the lowest levels. Not slightly higher, double. The fat I am talking about is not the kind you can see in the mirror. It is not the fat under your skin, it is visceral fat, the fat that wraps around your internal organs, your liver, your kidneys, your intestines, sitting deep inside your abdominal cavity, silently running a biological process that is quietly working against your arteries, your blood, and your brain. And here is what makes this specifically important for you. Most seniors over 60 with dangerous levels of visceral fat do not know they have it, because it does not always show up on the scale. You can have a normal BMI. You can feel reasonably healthy, and visceral fat can still be accumulating at a level that is doubling your stroke risk right now. I have spent the last 7 days going through the peer-reviewed research on exactly this, and today I am going to show you the biological mechanism behind why this fat is so dangerous, the institutions that have now confirmed the double risk, and a 5-step natural protocol that the research shows can meaningfully reverse it. So why has nobody told you about this? The answer is not complicated, but it is worth understanding. The standard measurement used at almost every routine checkup is BMI, body mass index, a calculation based on your height and weight, and for decades, it has been the primary tool used to assess obesity-related health risk. The problem is that BMI cannot distinguish between fat and muscle, and it cannot tell you where your fat is stored. Two people can have identical BMI readings and completely different visceral fat levels. One may have most of their fat stored safely under the skin. The other may have dangerous deposits wrapped around their organs. A landmark study published in the Journal of the American Heart Association followed community-dwelling adults around the age of 70. And found that visceral adipose tissue predicted stroke, heart attack, and all-cause mortality independently of BMI, meaning the scale was not catching what the deeper measurement revealed. And yet, waist circumference, the simplest proxy for visceral fat, is still not routinely measured and interpreted at most primary care appointments in the way that blood pressure or cholesterol is. China Health and Retirement Longitudinal Study, tracking thousands of adults with a mean age of around 60 over 7 years, found a clear dose-response relationship. The higher the visceral fat, the higher the stroke risk. Those in the highest visceral fat category had approximately 2.08 times the stroke risk of those in the lowest category, and each incremental standard deviation increase in visceral fat index added another 23% to relative stroke risk. This is not a fringe finding. This is convergent evidence from prospective cohort studies, national data sets, and genetic analyses, and the 15-minute appointment with your doctor is not connecting these dots for you. That is what today is for. Now, I want to flag something before we go into the mechanism. The same body of research that confirmed the double stroke risk also documented something equally important on the other side of that equation. Seniors who maintained low and stable visceral fat levels, or who moved from higher to lower visceral fat over time, had approximately 65% lower stroke odds compared with those who stayed in the high category, 65% lower, which is not a big deal for a responsible senior citizen. That number lives inside step 2 of the protocol I am going to give you today, and I do not want you to miss it. But first, drop your age and the city you are watching from in the comments right now. We read every single one. You are part of a community of adults who are done letting the most important numbers go unmeasured. So let me show you exactly what visceral fat is doing inside your body, because this is the part that makes everything else in this video make sense. Think of visceral fat not as stored energy, but as a silent inflammatory factory running deep inside your abdomen, unlike subcutaneous fat, the kind just beneath your skin. Visceral fat is metabolically active tissue. It is constantly secreting compounds into your bloodstream, and after 60, as visceral fat accumulates and the body's ability to regulate it declines, what that factory produces becomes increasingly dangerous. The primary outputs are pro-inflammatory cytokines, specifically IL-6 and TNF-alpha. These are the same inflammatory molecules at the heart of what researchers now call the inflammaging engine, the chronic low-grade systemic fire that drives accelerated aging across multiple organ systems simultaneously. When IL-6 and TNF-alpha reach your arterial walls, they begin damaging the endothelium, the thin, delicate inner lining of every blood vessel in your body. Think of that lining as the non-stick coating inside your arteries. When it is intact, blood flows smoothly, platelets do not stick, clots do not form easily. When visceral fat's inflammatory output strips that coating away, the arterial wall becomes rough, sticky, vulnerable to plaque formation. This is the beginning of atherosclerosis in your cerebral and carotid arteries, the vessels that feed your brain, and in adults over 60, where this process has often been running quietly for years. The accumulated damage creates the structural conditions for ischemic stroke. But the inflammatory pathway is only one mechanism. There are three others working in parallel. The second is metabolic. Visceral fat is the primary driver of insulin resistance in older adults, and insulin resistance produces a specific lipid pattern that accelerates arterial damage. Higher triglycerides, lower HDL, and an increase in small, dense LDL particles, the most dangerous form of cholesterol because of their ability to penetrate arterial walls and embed in plaque. Think of small, dense LDL as sand being forced through a thin pipe. The particles are small enough to get in and damaging enough to stay. The third mechanism is hemodynamic. Visceral fat activates the renin-angiotensin-aldosterone system, essentially the body's blood pressure regulation machinery, and increases sympathetic nervous tone. The result is elevated blood pressure, increased pulse pressure, and progressive arterial stiffness. Think of this as the pressure ratchet, a biological mechanism that keeps tightening, raising both ischemic and hemorrhagic stroke risk with every turn. The fourth is prothrombotic. Visceral fat is associated with elevated levels of fibrinogen and PAI1, two compounds that tip the blood toward clotting and away from clot dissolution. Think of this as the clot factory running alongside the inflammatory output, increasing the likelihood that when a vulnerable plaque ruptures, the resulting clot is larger, faster to form, and harder for the body to dissolve. And there is one more connection that the research has now confirmed through Mendelian randomization, meaning genetic evidence of causality, not just correlation. Visceral fat is causally linked to atrial fibrillation, AFib, which causes the heart to beat irregularly and allows blood to pool and clot inside the heart chambers, is itself one of the most powerful independent stroke risk factors in adults over 60. The pathway from visceral fat to AFib to stroke is now supported by genetic causal data published in major cardiovascular journals. Four parallel mechanisms with one common source, the silent inflammatory factory running quietly inside your abdomen. Let us take a look at real-life case study. Robert is 71 years old, retired carpenter, strong hands, methodical mind, the kind of man who spent 4 decades building things that were meant to last. His BMI was normal. His cholesterol numbers were, in his doctor's words, acceptable. He had no history of heart disease, and yet in the space of 18 months, Robert experienced 2 transient ischemic attacks, brief episodes where his speech slurred and his right hand went temporarily weak before recovering. His son, a licensed physical therapist, sat with Robert after the second TIA and asked him one question his doctors had never asked: whether anyone had ever properly measured his waist circumference and discussed visceral fat in the context of his stroke risk. The answer was no. Robert was skeptical, the way a man who has just survived 2 TIAs and been through every standard cardiac test tends to be skeptical of anything that sounds too simple. He told his son he expected the answer to involve something expensive or complicated. It did not. 90 days into the visceral reset protocol, Robert's waist measurement had come down. His inflammatory markers at his next blood panel had improved in ways his cardiologist noted quietly and without fanfare. No medication had been adjusted. No new prescription had been written. His son called it straightforward. Robert called it the conversation nobody had with him for 11 years of routine checkups. This is called the Visceral Reset Protocol. 5 steps, all of them natural, all of them starting from your kitchen, your bedroom, or your front door, grocery store accessible. Under $5 a month in additional cost. Step Step 1, the waist measurement reality check. Before anything else, you need the number. Stand straight, feet together, and measure your waist at the level of your navel with a flexible tape measure. Not your trouser size, your actual waist circumference at the belly button. For men over 60, a waist measurement above 40 inches is associated with significantly elevated visceral fat and metabolic risk. For women over 60, the threshold is 35 inches. These are not arbitrary numbers. They are the clinically established markers used in metabolic syndrome criteria by the American Heart Association. Write the number down, date it. This is your baseline. The protocol has a target direction, not a specific endpoint, because the research shows that movement from high toward lower visceral fat produces meaningful risk reduction at every stage of that journey. Step 2, the anti-inflammatory plate. This is where the 65% lower stroke odds lies. The dietary pattern most consistently linked to visceral fat reduction and stroke risk reduction in adults over 60 is a Mediterranean-style approach, not a diet, a plate pattern, and it does not require expensive specialty foods. Here is what it looks like in practical terms for a U.S. senior on a fixed income. At every main meal, fill half your plate with vegetables or legumes. Beans, lentils, chickpeas, canned or dried, are among the most powerful visceral fat-targeting foods available at under $2 per pound. They provide soluble fiber that directly reduces insulin spikes, the primary metabolic driver of visceral fat accumulation. Replace refined carbohydrates, white bread, white rice, sugary cereals, with whole grains, rolled oats, brown rice, whole wheat bread. One swap per meal is enough to start. Use 1 tablespoon of olive oil daily, on salads, on vegetables, on whole grain bread. Olive oil's olecanthal compound inhibits the same COX-2 inflammatory enzyme that drives the inflammaging engine, making it liquid anti-inflammatory in your kitchen. Add 1 serving of fatty fish per week, sardines or canned salmon, for omega-3 fatty acids that directly reduce triglycerides and arterial inflammation. A can of sardines costs under $2 and outperforms expensive fish oil capsules at a fraction of the cost. This pattern, sustained over weeks and months, is what the research shows moving seniors from the high visceral fat category toward the lower one. Step 3, the 30-minute walk rule. Here is something the research confirms that surprises most people. Regular aerobic movement reduces visceral fat, even without significant weight loss on the scale. A 30-minute brisk walk most days of the week, totaling at least 150 minutes per week, has been shown in multiple studies to improve endothelial function, reduce inflammatory markers, and directly target visceral adipose tissue. The scale may not move dramatically. The visceral fat responds anyway, because movement acts on visceral fat through mechanisms independent of caloric balance. For seniors with joint concerns or limited mobility, this does not need to be fast. It needs to be consistent. 3 10-minute walks spread through the day produce the same cumulative benefit as 1 30-minute session, after breakfast, after lunch, or after dinner. The post-meal window is particularly effective because movement at that time directly blunts the insulin spike that drives visceral fat storage. Step 4, the cortisol reset. This step addresses a mechanism that almost never gets mentioned in conversations about visceral fat. Cortisol, your primary stress hormone, is one of the most powerful drivers of central fat deposition in adults over 60. Chronic stress, poor sleep, disrupted sleep schedules, all elevate cortisol, and elevated cortisol specifically targets the abdominal region for fat storage. 2 changes, both free, both starting tonight. First, a consistent sleep and wake time, 7 days a week including weekends, not because sleep duration alone matters, but because circadian rhythm consistency is what regulates the cortisol curve. A disrupted cortisol curve means higher cortisol at the wrong times, and higher visceral fat accumulation as the result. Second, 10 minutes of deliberate stillness daily, not meditation if that word feels unfamiliar, simply sitting quietly, without a screen, without a task, for 10 minutes, light stretching. Slow breathing, a cup of tea in the garden. The specific activity matters less than the consistent break in sympathetic nervous activation that it provides. Cortisol down, visceral fat accumulation slows. The result is that scary silent inflammatory factory begins to quiet. Step 5. The doctor partnership question. At your next appointment, ask your physician this one question. Can we measure my waist circumference today and discuss what my visceral fat risk looks like given my current medications and metabolic markers? This question does three things simultaneously. It signals to your physician that you are aware of visceral fat as a stroke risk factor independent of BMI. It opens a conversation about whether any current medications, certain blood pressure drugs, steroids, are contributing to central fat accumulation. And it positions you as an informed advocate for your own vascular health, not a passive recipient of a standard checklist. The research is clear. Natural lifestyle interventions work best when combined with optimized medical management of blood pressure, blood sugar, and lipid levels. This protocol is not a replacement for that conversation. It is the preparation for it. Who should modify or avoid? If you have had a recent stroke or TIA in the last 3 months, please speak with your neurologist before beginning any new exercise or dietary protocol, as your medical team may have specific activity restrictions in place. If you have heart failure, significant kidney disease, or advanced liver disease, please consult your physician before making significant changes to fluid intake or dietary pattern, as individual management requirements vary considerably in these conditions. If you are on warfarin or other anticoagulants, increasing your intake of vitamin K-rich vegetables should be discussed with your physician first, as consistent dietary changes can affect INR stability. So here is what I want you to do tonight. Find a flexible tape measure, or a piece of string and a ruler. Measure your waist at the navel. Write the number down with today's date. That number is your starting point, not a verdict, a direction. Tomorrow morning, a bowl of oats with a tablespoon of olive oil drizzled over it, or a plate of eggs with a side of beans, and a 10-minute walk after you finish eating. That is day 1 of the Visceral Reset Protocol. And at your next doctor's appointment, take the question from step 5 with you, written down if you need to, because the most important conversation about your stroke risk may be the one that has not happened yet. Now, before we finish, I want to be clear about when this video is not enough. If you experience any of the following, do not wait and do not manage it at home. Seek emergency medical care immediately. Sudden weakness or numbness in your face, arm, or leg, especially on one side of the body. This is a classic stroke warning sign and requires calling 911 without delay. Sudden confusion, trouble speaking, or difficulty understanding what someone is saying to you. These are neurological emergencies. Sudden trouble seeing in one or both eyes, including a curtain-like loss of vision. Seek emergency care immediately. Sudden severe headache with no known cause, particularly if it is the worst headache of your life. This can signal a hemorrhagic stroke or aneurysm. Sudden dizziness, loss of balance, or loss of coordination, particularly when combined with any of the above symptoms. Chest pain or palpitations alongside shortness of breath. These may indicate atrial fibrillation, which is directly linked to visceral fat and stroke risk, and require urgent cardiac evaluation. Everything in this video is drawn from peer-reviewed research published in the Journal of the American Heart Association, the China Health and Retirement Longitudinal Study, national U.S. data from NHANES, and Mendelian randomization studies confirming causal links between visceral fat and stroke. All source links are in the description. This is educational information. It is not personal medical advice. And your specific situation deserves a real conversation with your physician. If this video gave you something important today, share it with someone you love who has been told their weight is fine, their cholesterol is acceptable, and their risk is low, without anyone ever measuring what is happening deeper. Not for this channel, for them. That is not a diet. That is stroke prevention, starting tonight. We will see you in the next one.